Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for joining us. It's exciting to see so many people here to talk about making interactive learning materials with Pressbooks. I'm Steele Wagstaff, the Educational Client Manager at Pressbooks, and my co-host today is Taylor McGrath. Taylor, do you want to introduce yourself?
Taylor McGrath. I do a lot of the tech support and QA for Pressbooks, as well as some communications, so you'll see me around.
Thanks, Taylor. Our colleague Liz Mays is also in the meeting and will be monitoring the chat for us. So she just turned on her video and waved. Liz, if you want to say hello, you're welcome to, but you don't have to. So what we wanted to cover today was increasingly as people are thinking about Pressbooks and building educational materials, they're thinking about the power of the web. And they're thinking about, we understand many of us what print text can be and can do, but once we start to think about the power of the web, a lot of things become exciting and become possible for Pressbooks and for educational publishing. So in this webinar, our plan is to share some ideas for how to make more engaging, more interactive teaching and learning materials, with a special emphasis on how to use some of the powers of the web in an open way in Pressbooks. The first thing that I'd like to do is I'm going to jump into a screen share and I'm going to talk about how you can insert and include multimedia of different kinds within your book and your export files. So I'm going to share my screen here, and what you'll be seeing in just a second is the Pressbooks admin interface for an individual book. So this is a book, and this particular chapter is about Machu Picchu, the Incan ruins and Incan site in Peru. So I've got some text here, and I think this text would really be improved by adding an image. But I don't have any pictures of Machu Picchu. I've never been to Machu Picchu. So I went to the Creative Commons search engine here, and I did a search for Machu Picchu, and I found a bunch of Creative Commons images that have been licensed that can be modified or adapted by others. And there's one in particular that I really liked. It was on Flickr. Here's the image itself, and I'd like to use this image in my Pressbook. So the first thing I'm going to do is come over and Flickr. The interface looks like this. There's a little download this image button, and I'll decide what size of image I want to use. In many cases, you don't need a super huge image, especially for a web book or a print book. So I said the medium size is the right size for me. I'm going to download the medium size image. I also am going to note a few things about this image, who created it, and the license that it was released under. In this case, the license is listed here. If I were to open this, it would say this was released under a Creative Commons CC BY NC, which means attribution and non-commercial. So I now have an image that I want to include in my book. So I'm going to come to Add Media in Pressbooks, and I'm going to click Upload Files. I've saved the file to my desktop. So this is the image that I downloaded from Flickr. I'm going to open it here, and it's going to upload to my Pressbooks book. Once it's done that, we're going to see an element or an attribute over on the right-hand side where I can enter a bunch of information about this image. The most important thing to enter from an accessibility point of view is alt text. And this is going to be a description of the image that would appear for any viewers that are unsighted or using assistive technology, or for whom the image just doesn't appear for some reason. So I would say I can just call this very simply Machu Picchu. If I wanted to give the image a caption, I could say aerial photograph of Machu Picchu, and I could add a description. In this case, I'm not going to do that. I can also give a source URL for this book or this image. So in this case, the source URL I got from Flickr, so I'm going to take that URL and I'm going to enter it here. The author, I know, oops, sorry, close this tab. The author happened to be Cordelia Person, so I'm going to take her name and give her credit as the author of this image or the originator. And I could include an author URL. In this case, I'll just link to her Flickr page. So I'll say here, if you want to know more about Cordelia Person, her author URL is there. And then I can indicate what license this was used under. In this case, we looked up and it was CC BY NC. We'll support any public domain, any Creative Commons licenses, or all rights reserved. If it's your image and it's all rights reserved, you can list it and license it that way. If I made some changes or adaptations, it's typically required by the license to list them, so I could say adapted by Steele and adapted my URL. In this case, I'm just keeping the image as is, so I'm not adapting it in any way. But let's say I'd overlaid the text Machu Picchu and made a remix of the image. I could do that. I can then decide how I want the image to be included. So I want to float this image left I want the link to the media file, and I want to insert it at the full size is fine. So I'm going to insert this into the chapter. So you can see now I've just inserted an image into Pressbooks. It has a caption here, and it will have all the other attribution information that I've included there. That's the pretty basic way to find images that I did not originate, that were Creative Commons licensed, add them to Pressbooks, and give proper attribution for them. Another thing that I want to do, I guess I'll save this first. Another thing I may want to do is display the attributions for media elements on my webbook and in my exports. To choose that as a setting, we're going to go to Appearance and Theme Options. You'll see that there's a global theme option called Media Attributions. When I turn this on, those attributions that I've added to media elements will now display in the chapter. So when I credited the image originator, Cordelia Person, the credit for that image will now appear in the book if I turn this attribution on. So I'm going to say, yes, I do want to display attributions. I'm going to come down and I'm going to save changes. So that's what I needed to do to be able to insert an image and add media attributions for it. The next thing I may want to do is in my chapter back here, I want to come back and I now want to add not just images, I want to add audio elements. So I'm going to come back to this Machu Picchu chapter. And in this particular case, the audio elements don't match exactly, but I have 4 small audio files of Portuguese speakers pronouncing vocabulary words. So let's pretend like that's the right context for this. Again, I'll click Add Media, and I'll find them on my computer. So I would click Upload Files, and here are my audio files. So I'd select those files, and I would upload them. And so what I've done is in this particular book, you'll see in the media library, these files have been uploaded. So here are audio files. If I want to insert an individual audio file, I'll just select the file. I can change the title. I can give the artist credit. I can say what album it came from if it was a musical album. I can give it a caption. So I'll say, caption, I'll just say, album pronounced by a native Brazilian Portuguese speaker. And then I'll say, how do I want to insert this? I usually will just want to embed a media player, but it gives me some choices here. And I'm going to say, insert this into the chapter. So I've now just inserted an audio file. This audio will play in the webbook, and when I produce ebook exports, the audio file will be included with the ebook export, so that if someone doesn't have internet access and has downloaded the EPUB, the audio file will be there for them to play, which is a nice feature. Another thing that I can do, instead of just adding an individual audio file, I can also make audio playlists. And this is nice if you have several pieces of audio that go together. In this case, I have 4 vocabulary words. So what I'm going to do is, from this Add Media menu, I'm going to select Create Audio Playlist. And I'll say, these are the 4 files that I want. I've selected 4 of them, and I'm going to say Create a New Playlist. Now, once I get into this playlist, I can reorder it. I can rename them. I'll say I want Tamba. Okay. All right. So I'm adding media. I'm going to create a playlist that has 4 audio elements. Sorry, I'm going to create an audio playlist. We have 4 audio elements. That's great. We're going to make a new playlist. We're going to insert the audio playlist. And so you can see there's now a playlist with 4 elements in it. If I wanted to edit that playlist and change it in some way, I can click the Edit button, and I would be able to add to the audio playlist. So let's say there's another file that I didn't add before, an audio file of some kind. I can add it to the audio playlist, and I could remove a particular image or a file that I didn't want to be there anymore. I'd click Update, and now you can see the audio playlist has been altered. So that's the 2 elements that we showed. We showed first the image with attributions, and here's how you could insert audio and audio playlists. The third thing that's of interest for people is the ability to insert video. And typically, Pressbooks is not a great place to host video. It's not a video streaming service. It's okay probably to host images as small media and small audio files. But if you want to use larger media, you should really host it at a dedicated media streaming service. Your campus may provide one. So when I was at the University of Wisconsin, they used Kaltura. There's lots of campus streaming hosting services. Or you could use video that's hosted from commercial streaming services like YouTube or Vimeo. So in this case, I found a YouTube video about Machu Picchu produced by National Geographic, and this is the one I'd like to use. So in Pressbooks, what we need to do is grab the URL from YouTube, come back to my Pressbooks chapter, and find a new line in the visual editor and paste the video. We'll use something called Embed, and that URL will automatically be converted into an embedded video. I can do the same thing with the Vimeo video. So in Vimeo, I also found a nice aerial time-lapse video. So I'll grab that URL, and I'll come back to Pressbooks, and I'll paste it, and voila, the video will become an embedded video. So what I can now do is save this chapter, and what we'll say is, in this chapter, we have a number of different embedded visual elements. So I'm ready to view my chapter in the book. The first thing we'll notice is, here in my book, I have an audio element. There's a Brazilian Portuguese speaker saying the word também. Here's my image. If I click on it, I can see the image in a little light box. I then have an audio playlist. And I could jump to, say, this part of the audio playlist. So the playlist is interactive and users can navigate through the playlist. Here you have an embedded YouTube video. And here's an embedded Vimeo video. And then at the bottom, here's my media attribution. That image that I uploaded is now giving Cordelia Person proper credit and giving the license that she indicated that the work should be licensed under. So that's in a quick nutshell how you would add media and media attribution. I'm going to hand it over to Taylor, and hopefully her part of the presentation will go a little bit smoother.
Hopefully. I wanted to say, I believe that there was a question earlier from Allie that maybe got skipped over. How do you attribute the title of an image or a sound clip if they're untitled?
That's a great question. So you can provide or give your own title, or you can use untitled as the title of the work. So in this case, the title that you saw in my media attributions was the name of the file, and so you could replace that title or that name in the Pressbooks interface where I believe you saw title as one of the attributes, and that's what would generally be shown. A bunch of people had other questions. So I saw a question from Jonathan Poritz, which was, what happens to the audio when you export to PDF? Great question. We'll show you that a little bit later, Jonathan. Usually there'll be a graceful fallback that will say a media attribute could not be included. Click here for the link to find the media in the interactive component. Liz answered that in the chat, and so did Apurva. Thank you. And Kathy says the PDF automatically writes out the URL. Yeah, the URL is to the chapter where the media is embedded. And thanks for remembering the question. Okay, I think we're caught up. Now we're ready for you, Taylor.
Yeah. Okay. So what Steele just covered was mostly all of the media that you can put into your book, into the media library, with the exception of the Vimeo and the YouTube at the end, which would kind of fall more into what I'm about to talk about, which is media that comes from outside of Pressbooks that you're not putting in your media library, that you're linking into it and it's being hosted on a different platform. And really with this, the possibilities are endless. So I'm about to show you a sample of the kinds of things that you can put in a book to make it interactive, kind of educational things. But basically, as long as a piece of media is meant to be shared and it has a embeddable iframe that you can copy, then you can put it in a book. So there's a couple different ways to do that. The first one is stuff that we whitelist on purpose, that is just globally whitelisted across every Pressbooks network. And those are things that you can just paste the URLs into your visual editor and they just appear. So a couple of those would be like FET simulations. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. Okay, there we go. So I've got a book set up here, how to embed interactive media from the global whitelist. And the first thing I want to go visit is FET simulations. So these are interactive simulations created by the University of Colorado that are, they've created a whole library of them on math and science. So this is just one of the things that you can go visit. These websites that are creating content that is openly licensed, that is meant for you to be putting in books like this. So for this one, I'll notice that it's based on HTML5, which mean it's compatible with Pressbooks, and I can click the embed button down here and it gives me an iframe. Now, FET, people have asked for it, so we've taken the time to make sure that it works across every network. So actually, I don't think I need the iframe for that one. I can use the iframe, but I can actually just copy the URL here. And then I'll go into my book and paste in the URL, and my FET simulation will appear. So these kind of simulations, these are when they're saved into a chapter, then students and learners can interact with the settings of the activity. Let's refresh this. And once it loads, there are things that you can change. And I'll show you the differences in these visualizations, what happens when these different settings. So it's all sorts of stuff like that, the university is created for people to be able to use in their books. Something that's a little bit different we've also put on our global whitelist is a couple of things that come from NightLab. So NightLab is, I think, created by Northwestern University. And instead of being a library of different kind of activities that you can copy in, this is a story making tool that you can create your own. So if faculty who are creating a book of history wanted to create a timeline that walked from Greek history and kind of went throughout, Socrates, whatever, then they can create those timelines that span, 500 years with these visualizations that have videos and Wikipedia articles and maps and everything embedded into that. So these storytelling tools have been built for you to be able to customize these different media and then put them into a book. So I'll take this one for example. So when you create a timeline, it comes from a spreadsheet and then you publish it, and you'll come up with a URL like this. So just like the one I've just shown you, this is something that you can just paste into the visual editor, and then a timeline appears. So we'll take a look at how that looks in the chapter later, after we go over a few more of these. So StoryMap is another one from Timeline. And you'll see that it's a little bit different. So it's based on the visualization of a map. You're embedding those same sorts of like images and videos, Wikipedia articles, anything that enriches the experience, but instead of over time, we're thinking geographically. So you can also create these custom maps and place them into a book on Pressbooks. So I've created a map of where I've lived for the last 5 years. So I start here and go around North America for a while. And I am going to copy paste that. Into my chapter. We'll see the Where's Waldo a little bit later. Another one created by MIT is called Open Assessments. And this is kind of what Pressbooks used before we had H5P built into the platform. Was we encourage people to be creating their own quizzes through this Open Assessments platform. So you can go on here, and once you sign up, you can create quizzes. You'll see that there's plenty of assessments that already exist, and those are able to be pasted into Pressbooks already. But you can also create your own. And so I've got an example one right here, I think it's a 10 question quiz, and then it pops up, and you'll get all 10 questions of the quiz, and they're able to answer those and go through it. So the Google Forms is a little bit different. So Google Forms isn't something that we can just have you embed into the visual editor. So we had to build it a little differently. And then what we did there was make it possible for everyone to be able to put the iframe into the text editor. So that's only an action that's that you're capable of doing if you have network admin permissions. So a lot of you on this call may. But regular users wouldn't be able to do that, except for these ones that we have put this special permission on. So if I wanted to embed a Google form, another way of creating a quiz, and I can change the settings to allow people to see it without being in my organization. I can make it public, and then I can embed that using this embed HTML code. So I've copied it.
And Taylor, just to slow down again, what you were describing was in Google Forms, you built a form and then you published the form or made it public.
Right.
And then you were able to get an embed code so that others could view it. Does that sound like the right workflow? Okay.
Yeah, so if you go to forms.google.com, or maybe it's a little bit different, but if you go to the Forms application that's available through Google, anybody has access to it as long as they have Google account, Gmail, and so you can create any new form, and then all you have to do is make sure that the settings have been altered so that you can make it public, and then you can embed it via the text editor. So I've taken that code that I was able to copy from the HTML box there, and then I can save it. So let's look at a couple that we've put in here so far. Refresh. And we're able to customize the sizes of this afterward if we want to, if they're a bit too big or too small. But you can go through, click and see all of these work dynamically, and that you can that students and readers can experience the different layers of the book. And so these can be submitted, and you can set up creating things through Google. But that doesn't happen in Pressbooks, but it'll all come through how it would with any other web page. And so I think that the next, yes. So those are all the things that we'd like to show you that's already available in Pressbooks without anybody changing anything. But
Taylor?
Yeah.
There's a question in the chat about the Google Forms.
Sure.
Yeah, I'll read that out so that people who aren't in the chat can hear it. This is from Lauren Ray. She asked, were you saying that network admins have to whitelist Google Forms as well as the other two tools you mentioned, NightLabs and Open Assessments?
Yeah, so all of that is already, everything that I've gone through so far, that is already allowed on the network by default. You don't have to do anything. The difference between Google Forms and everything else that I've shown you is that Google Forms couldn't be put in through the visual editor. It's not compatible with something called Embed, which Steele had mentioned earlier. So because it has to be put in with an iframe URL instead of with just a regular URL, that has to be done through a slightly different mechanism, but it doesn't need to be whitelisted at the network level because it already is.
And Taylor, real quick, while you're showing your screen,
yeah.
Not everybody, I don't know if everybody's familiar with switching between the visual and the text editor.
Right.
Could you kind of just show that toggle a little slowly?
So this is what we'd call what you see is what you get, a WYSIWYG kind of editor. So you can see all of the styles. You can see that the headings are blue and that they're bigger or smaller. You see the difference between a paragraph and a heading. But if you switch from the visual tab up here to the text tab, then everything turns into HTML. So you'll see that the headings have error wrapped in tags that say H1, that you can see where the anchors and the links are. And so that is where the code has to go. So it does make it a little bit more technical to be able to paste in those activities. But generally it's just paste in and go. And then you can always switch back to the text editor where you have the ability to style everything up here.
And so for my quick summary would be, for Lauren's question, videos from YouTube and Vimeo, PhET simulations, the timelines, and the story maps are things where you just paste the URL and in the visual editor and it becomes an embed. For Google Forms, you have to switch to the text editor and paste the iframe. And we're going to talk a little bit more about other iframe whitelisting, which network managers can do here in just a second.
Right. So there's very few of these situations where you're going to have to, if something is already whitelisted on Pressbooks, that you're going to have to use it as an iframe. Google Forms is one of them. Google Maps is another. And then there are maybe one or two others like Brightcove that would be necessary for. The next thing I want to talk to you about is your network's manual whitelist. So for those of you who are network managers, you have access to this. So what you would go to is Network Settings. And then on the Network Options tab with the network defaults, you'll scroll down and see that you have an option to add to the iframe whitelist. So here you'll see that I've already added npr.org. And for Google, I may also need to add docs.google.com. And so what this does is it whitelists those domains. So any regular user, if a iframe has a domain that comes from one of those whitelisted domains, then they can put that content into their chapter. And the reason we put this here is so that you can put whatever media on your network that you deem safe. So it is possible to embed malicious things through iframes, which is why we limit it to sources that we deem safe. And so we trust you to do that as well. So the network managers have control over what goes on this list and what media users are able to put on theirs. And this also means that if you aren't a network manager, that there is a way of asking if certain content that you want can be added. So I'm going to go ahead and save that change, and then I'll go back to my book. And so my friend Steele here did a couple of really cool presentations recently. And let's see, one of them was called Open Platforms, Ethical EdTech, and Inclusive Ownership. So maybe I want to put this in my book. I'm going to quickly bring up the iframe. So if this was a presentation that I had, what I would do is go to File, Publish to the Web, which would allow me to make an iframe out of that. But I've asked Steele to send me the iframe earlier, so I could use this one. And so now that I have the iframe and I've copy-pasted it, or I've copied it, we'll go into my chapter and pick out a place for it. There we go. And save my chapter. And so Google Slides isn't on the global whitelist, but I put it on my networks. So now I've got an interactive presentation that I can go through in my chapter. And the last one I wanted to show you is NPR. So you can embed audio and podcasts a little differently than you would from the media that he showed you earlier. So here I've got a 6-minute audio clip from an article on NPR. I can click embed here, copy my iframe that I've already whitelisted, and any user on that network can now put it in. Okay, so let's see what our chapter looks like now.
Taylor, I have to say I'm a little bit disappointed you didn't choose to embed from the CBC. But I mean, you know.
Well, isn't this a great presentation, y'all? So that's what I wanted to show you so far. This is just a small chunk of what's possible with embedded media. It's really whatever you can find and what's able to be shared. Were there any questions?
I think we answered them, Taylor, but
okay.
there were some people asking questions about what are the things that only network managers can do versus book admins. And the answer, in case you weren't following the chat, is only network managers can add extra sources to a network whitelist. Right. So if you're an instructor that really wants to embed content from somewhere else, you need to talk to your network manager and make the case that that source is safe and should be trusted for your network. If they agree with you, they'll add it to the whitelist, and then you will be able to embed content onto your Pressbooks network. If a source is not whitelisted, only network managers can embed from that source. So network managers have some special God powers, and they can share those powers if they deem some other source trustworthy enough to go on the whitelist. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to talk about here is how to build interactive tables. So in a lot of disciplines, presenting information in tabular forms is pretty important, and you can build by hand or with the Pressbooks tool static tables, which are static tables. You can also build interactive tables, and I'm going to share my screen and show you how you can use a tool called TablePress that we think is pretty slick. So TablePress is a WordPress plugin that we've enabled and integrated with Pressbooks. So to use it in your book, you'd click on the plugins menu. If you're on a PressbooksEDU network, this will be there for you. You'll come down to TablePress and you'll click Activate. Once that plugin has been activated, you'll see a TablePress menu in your book dashboard. So when you come to TablePress, you'll be able to create a new table or import a table. If we create a new table, you'll say, what's the name of my table? Fake table, fake description. And I'm going to make a very simple 3-row, 3-column table. And I'm going to then fill in the content. Name, book, color, steel, Walden, Taylor, nothing, J, Orange. So I just made a table, and then I have a bunch of other settings that I can add here. I'm going to say the first row of the table is the table header, and I'm going to display the table name above the table, and I'm going to click Save Changes. So I've just made a TablePress table. It has this ID. So I can take that ID or that short code and come anywhere I want into my book and insert that table somewhere in the book. So I'm going to come into my introduction, which is pretty uncluttered, and I'll put a table here in my introduction. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say, that was nice, but I also actually happen to have a CSV file. So I came to a website that someone has made a bunch of open and licensed CSV files, and I found a cool one that's an example of Old Faithful geyser eruption times. There's 272 records with 3 values each. I want that table in my book. So I'm going to come to TablePress, and I'm going to say import a table. I'm going to choose the file I want to upload. So I happen to download, it's called Faithful here. And I'm going to choose what format the table was in. It supports a few different upload formats, but in this case, it's a CSV file, which is basically a spreadsheet with comma-separated values. And I'm going to add this as a new table, and I'm going to say import. So I've made a new table. I'm going to call this Old Faithful, and we'll call it like eruption times observed in March 2018. And I'm going to give Wade credit because he's been active in this chat. So Wade Schumacher observed these. There you go, Wade. And here's this actual table itself. It's a big one. It imported really nicely. And at the bottom, I'm going to say, let's show the table name, and we'll also show the table description. If I want to add extra CSS classes for styling, you can enter those there. So that would be a class that I could then target. And then I would also say, here are some of the features. So for example, I want to enable sorting. I want to enable filtering. I want to enable searching, and I want to do pagination. And I want to show 50 rows per page, or let's do 70, let's do 100 45 rows per page by default. And if it's a very wide table, I could also turn on horizontal scrolling. This one just has 3 columns, so it should be okay. And I'm going to save the changes. Great, it's saved successfully. I'm going to go to the top of this page, and I have a new table ID that I can insert. So I come back to my book. I'm going to enter, here's another table. So now when I save this, I'm going to show you the way that tables look in a book. So here's my first table. I can sort this alphabetically, and I could also say I only want to see cells that have the letter EE in them. And now I'm showing a filtered table. It's interactive. And here's my old faithful eruption times observed March 18th. Right now it's going to show me 145 entries, and I'm going to sort it by eruption length, sort it by weight, and I only want to see things that have the number 15 in them for some reason. So now I've filtered it down to 18 out of 272. I can also turn on pagination so that it's a big table, but if I want to see the next page of the table, here's the next set of entries in the table. So it's a really slick tool. It lets you build interactive tables. You can do all kinds of things with this, and tables can include lots of different types of content. These table features generally are accessible, Ali. That's a good question. They should work with screen readers. If you look underneath, this is just a table, and it's a well-formatted HTML table, and it's JavaScript that's sorting this. Can you sort with mathematical formula and regular expressions? That's a good question, Jonathan. I don't know the answer to that. I think some mathematical expressions can be sorted. There's a couple of notes to know about including LaTeX or other math expressions in the table. I'm not going to jump into the weeds for it right now, but maybe you and I can talk afterwards. Like less than 17? Good question. I don't know. You stumped me. And I should find out the answer and tell you. And I will do that, but not right now. Okay, the other thing that I wanted to note is when you're importing a table, there's a very cool feature that also lets you import a zip file that has multiple CSV files. So I downloaded 3 of those tables from the OpenCSV thing, and I've got 1 zip file. I'm going to upload them all at once, and they're all CSV files. Now that I do this, it's going to say that I just imported 3 tables successfully like that. And so it's a really cool way to build and make tables. Once you have tables made, you'll have a big list of all your existing tables. You'll be able to see them. You'll be able to show the shortcode or copy the shortcode and use it in your book. You also have a bunch of plugin options that let you load custom CSS. And I don't want to get too in the weeds there, but it's a really nice feature. When you export a table, the table will be displayed as a flat table without sorting, filtering features. So I will close this tab, and I'll close this tab, and I will say, let's do that export thing. So in this book, I'm going to export a PDF export and an EPUB, and I will show you what the PDF and EPUB exports for a sample book and all these interactive features will look like. Because as you know, a PDF is a fixed format, offline file format, so many of these interactive features won't work, but we want to let users know that they're there in the web book and how to find them. So I'll give you a quick demo of how this works. So I've finished my PDF export. I'm going to download it, and I'm going to show it to you. So here is the PDF export I just made for my book. And great. All right, here's my flattened table. It's a nice table. It's no longer filtered sortable. Here's another table. It's big, right? But it's there. And then, I skip pages. Okay, now I come into our section. Here's the chapter that Taylor made. We have some weird features in it, but let's look at the PhET simulation. It tells me there was a PhET simulation here. It's been excluded from this text, and here's the URL that you can go to find that book. So if I were to create an interactive version, you would have just been able to click the link, but I would then open up this. No, it didn't work there, but what I would do is I would paste that link in an interactive version, and it would take me to the page and show me that interactive content is there. Here's my timeline, the same thing. Here's another timeline, a NightLab thing. Here's an open assessment that was excluded from the book. Here is the interactive media element. I can't remember what that one was, Taylor. Google Form, that was a Google Form. Here's the Google Slides. And then the NPR element, this was excluded there. We're going to get to this later, so let me jump down and show you my. Let me jump down and show you my chapter, which was called Machu Picchu. So again, there was an audio element that didn't work in the PDF, but it told me it was there. My image works just fine with the caption. There was an audio element that was excluded here, and then I broke something in the playlist, so apologies. Here's my YouTube element. It works and it has a link there. And here's my Vimeo element that has a screenshot and I excluded from this book there. Here's my media attribution that shows who the person was, gives credit, and lists the CC attribution. So that, in a kind of quick nutshell, is how those elements will look in your PDF exports. It's a little bit difficult for me to screen share with an EPUB, but they work similarly, though the audio elements are included in the EPUB. Okay, what happens to those links to interactive content if an institution no longer subscribes to Pressbooks? Well, this link here is going to point back to the book that hosted that content. If that book is taken off of the web, those links will not resolve to anything, and the media will only exist as long as it's hosted somewhere. If you were to leave Pressbooks and take your book somewhere else, you'd probably want to generate new exports so that the URLs were correct. But I hope that answers your question, Ken. Is there any way to have the static version have the URL and a chosen image, like a screen grab of the map or timeline tools? That's something to explore. We'd have to. That's not a feature that we currently do, Jonathan, but that's something we could explore. We'd have to figure out what screen grab to grab and use and how to insert one and that kind of stuff. But it's not outside the realm of possible. It's just not something we do right now. Okay, so I'm going to stop that part of the demonstration now. I'm going to give it back to Taylor, and we're going to talk about probably the most exciting piece of interactive content in Pressbooks, and that has to do with H5P.
It doesn't just have to do with H5P, it is H5P. So H5P is, I talked earlier a little bit about it in reaction to open assessments, and it's what I'd say is like a development on top of that. So it's a quiz-based interactive content building tool that that is based on HTML5 and JavaScript, and it's something that we added to Pressbooks, I think, in 2018. And so this lets you build more than 40 different content types, anything from quizzes to these interactive images and fill in the blanks and math base and charts. And so I'll show you the list in a little bit. What I first want to walk you through is kind of how to get started with H5P. And so let me just share my screen real quick. Oh, shucks. All right. So the first thing that you do when you have your book and you're trying to find H5P is you go to the plugins page. And I already have it active for my book, but it would look kind of like Press Down Party Erica's made here, in that it would be white and it would have an activate link. And so you'll see now that H5P has a deactivate link, so I can turn it back off. And once you've activated H5P in this plugins page, which should be available from every network, is you can go down to the H5P content tab here. And here, because I have created a bunch of activities, I have a list. But at first, it's going to ask you if you want to start creating activities and if you want to access their hub to create them. So I'll go here and I'll create a new activity. And you have the choice to upload, but I'm not going to do that right now. I'm creating content fresh. And so I'll decide to create a multiple choice question. I'll click use so that it's now added to my H5P library as a content choice. And I'll start filling in the needed metadata for this. So what's a good question? What is the best season in Montreal. It's very much not this one. So the available options: summer, correct. Winter, definitely not correct. Fall or spring, which are both about 2 weeks long. And I'll click create. And as long as I've filled everything out, it'll create my new H5P quiz. And I will go over here and grab the short code. And it'll also be added to all of my H5P content, so I'll be able to get it from over here as well. So now that I've got that, I can go into my chapter. And either I can just paste it because I grabbed it from there, or I can click the Add H5P button here, and it'll show me all of the activities that I have, and I can click Insert, and it'll grab me the shortcode and put it in for me. And so I'll save that and view my chapter. And we've got a functional quiz. And so what this is, these kind of things can be really handy for some reassessing students at certain points throughout a text. So once they get to the end of a section, testing them without even scoring or grading, just to instill in the process what the answers are, so they know what they know. And there's a lot of science behind this that we can maybe share later. But I'm going to go back to the H5P content library, the add new, and there's 43 different content types that H5P has created so far that are available through Pressbooks. So I've showed you the multiple choice, but there's also virtual tours, image pairing. You'll see a lot of these are very visually based. So they're things that you can just create dynamically that can match with the content of a book. Drag and drop, collages, charts. So I've created a sample chapter that has a lot of these different activities. So let's scroll back up to the top here. So here's a course presentation, for example. This is a particular activity that you can choose and build. And so it's different images that also have embedded assessments that match with it. There's interactive videos, so videos that play and you'll have things that pop up at certain points in the video. Accordions that let you show and hide information. Maps that can show sequences and progress visually. Quizzes that are timed. Recorded audio so people can test themselves against kind of like Duolingo. To presentations that you can build to show different charts, bar charts and pie charts. Collages. Quizzes like I'd shown. So I'll just go ahead and scroll through the rest of these.
And I apologize because we're running a little tight on time, largely because of my technical problems. So Taylor's right that there are a lot of very cool H5P activity types. And what I want to do is I want to also drop a link in here and put a plug in for something that I think is a really great resource for everyone.
Do you want to go ahead and share that? I can.
Yeah, I put it in the chat. I'll put it in the chat. Okay, great. So this was when I was working at the University of Wisconsin, I had a really terrific graduate assistant named Naomi Salmon. And working together, we built what we called an OER activity source book. This describes a bunch of different kinds of learning activities that you can build largely in Pressbooks, often with H5P. So we were working a lot with language instructors, and so we have a bunch of different kinds of language activities So for example, the flashcard activity, it shows you at the top what kind of activity materials you built, and then there's some examples that we built for like language-based flashcards. Here's one for learning the names of berries in Spanish, for example. In this book, there's lots of different examples. One other one that I wanted to highlight here was the H5P activity tutorials. So we talk about how you can import and modify different H5P activities, how you can build lots of different writing activity kinds of things. And then the one that's pretty neat is there's a virtual tour tool that H5P has built that lets you do 360 panorama images with annotation on them in the form of these hotspots. So if you're thinking about teaching space or place-based things, sorry, that one didn't work, you can include text hotspots that describe what's happening in this 3D panorama. And here's like an audio element that's been included here. And it's pretty awesome. And these are all open source activities that can be included in the book. When H5P activities are included in Pressbooks, they can also be cloned or copied along with the book when the book is cloned or copied. So if you like a book and like its H5P activities, when you copy the book, the source activities will come and you can edit and tweak and revise and remix them as well. So that's H5P. We hope you get really excited. If you want to know more about H5P, we have sections in our guide. They also have a website, h5p.org. And there's going to be an H5P conference coming to North America for the first time in May of next year. It'll be hosted in my hometown of Madison, Wisconsin. So I'm looking forward to that. Lauren said in the chat she did a workshop with faculty, and in the H5P part, she created a Google Doc that listed H5P activity examples. Amazing. Okay. If Lauren, you want to share that if you have it? Okay, you're the best. Great. The last thing that we want to talk to you about and show you is how to do web-based annotation. And we built in a tool that's called Hypothesis for this. In order to enable hypothesis and annotation in your book, you come in the book dashboard to the Settings Hypothesis. And then you'll decide which part of your book you want to allow it on. In this case, I want to allow it in chapters. I could also allow it front matter, back matter, glossary parts. But for now, we'll just stick to chapters. So I'm allowing in chapters, and I'm saving the changes. What this means is that when I come and view a Pressbook title, and I view this H5P examples chapter that Taylor has made, you will see in a second here. On the right-hand side, there's this little overlay here that looks a little unfamiliar to me. I haven't installed any special software in my computer. I don't have a browser plugin. This is Hypothesis, and what it is an annotation pane or annotation tool. If I were to select some text in my book, a little pop-up would say annotate or highlight. If I click annotate, Hypothesis says, we'd like to help you make an annotation. What would you like to annotate, or what would you like to write? And so in this tool, what we're doing is allowing people to make social annotation happen. In order to use Hypothesis, you'd first need to create a Hypothesis account. They're free. It's an open source tool. So I've signed up for Hypothesis and I've logged in. But let's say I hadn't done that. I'd come in here and I'd say, in order to create an annotation, you must log in. You can view them without having created them. So I'm going to come to my Machu Picchu chapter and I'm going to make some annotations. The first thing I want to do is I want to say, okay, the Spanish invaded Peru. Let's annotate this. So here I'm going to select this and I'm going to say annotate. I'm going to log in as me. So now I'm logged in. So I can create a new annotation. I'm going to do. I forgot I already made that one. So I'm going to click this button to make a new annotation. Oops, sorry. My mouse is escaping me. I'm going to say annotate. And it's going to say this right here is in the public layer. I can type some text. This text happens to have a link in it. So I'm going to post this as a public annotation. Now I'm going to say, you know, I also want people to know a little bit more about this Pizarro character. So I might say, let's make an annotation here that has an image or that links to more about Pizarro. So I'm going to include an image. And I found this image of Francisco Pizarro on his Wikipedia page. So I'll say Pizarro's face. And then what I would do is I'd click this little insert image button and then paste my URL for the image, post it to public. I did it wrong. Let's try that again. Now, I've made an image in my annotation layer. I can do the same thing actually with images that I've uploaded from Pressbooks. So this image itself has a URL. So I could copy that image address and I could make a new annotation and I'd say, here's my image of Machu Picchu. Let's say I didn't want it in the main text of my thing, but I wanted it in the annotation layer. I could say, picture of Machu Picchu. I spelled Machu Picchu wrong, but you're not judging me, are you? Okay. And I could give the person credit if I really was taking time. Paste that image in, and I'll post that. I've just embedded, this image is hosted in Pressbooks, but it's now in my annotation layer. We can do the same thing with audio files. So earlier you saw that I uploaded an audio file. So I have this audio file. I know where the URL is. So I'm going to say, let's have this audio file. And I'll say, paste that audio file. It turns it into an embedded audio element. So I've added images. I've added audio to this element. Now I can also add this YouTube video. So earlier I copied that YouTube link. So let me put that in the annotation layer. I'll put the YouTube video first, and then I'll do the Vimeo. Come down here, and I'll say, let's make a reply. Here's my YouTube video. And posted that. So it's now embedded that YouTube video in the annotation layer. And the same thing could happen for Vimeo. All of this here is public annotation. So that anyone who reads the book comes through and they say, oh, look, there's an annotation. I click on it, and I'm able to read. There's been a conversation, a discussion here. I could show all the annotations in a book. I could also say, you know what, I want to make a note about this page, but it's not connected to anything. So I could come over and say, let's make a page note. So I click this button to make a new page note and say, this chapter is pretty interesting, but it doesn't talk enough about the effects of the colonial conquest. For more on that topic, see, and then I could post a link to some other source that I think is better. And so now when people come to this page, they could say, oh, there's some annotations. There's these general annotations that are anchored, and there's also just an overall page note. In addition to making public annotations, I might want to do something in private, just with my students or just with the class. That's pretty easy to do as well. I can click New Private Group. I'm going to say Webinar Demo Group. Group used for live webinar. And I've just created a new private group. So I can invite anybody in this call to join this group by sharing that link with you. And I can come back to this Machu Picchu level and I can say Spanish invasion. I'm going to annotate that. I'll click annotate. And instead of public, I'll come down and switch to my webinar demo group. Now, when I make this annotation, it will be on this totally separate hypothesis layer that's only visible to people in that group. So here I might say, let's put a link to the Atahualpa, who was the Incan leader that Pizarro deposed. And so I did that wrong. So bear with me as I figure out how to use my computer. Okay. So now I've posted a new annotation that only exists in this private group. As a reader of the book, I can toggle between layers. So if I go to the public layer, I see a whole bunch of different annotations. But if I go to this private group, I only see the annotations that are made in that private group. Viewers can reply to it, they can edit it, they can do more. And the other really nice thing about annotations is every annotation has its own addressable URL. So if I click this share link, this will be a URL that would take someone directly to this annotation in the book. So let's say I shared, a student was having a question about Pizarro and the Incan leader, and they wanted to know what this person looked like. I could send them that URL. As they load the URL in their browser, it loads this book, and then it loads this annotation and takes them right to that spot in the book. That's very helpful for learning situations if you want to direct a student quickly to a part of the book and your explanation or your gloss. The last thing that I'll show, and I won't detail it in any great detail, is John Udell at Hypothesis has built a very cool tool that lets you copy annotations. So for example, I may have made a whole bunch of annotations on one book, and then I cloned the book to a new location, but my annotations didn't come with it. So using this tool, I can choose to copy annotations from one URL to another, or even from one group to another at the same URL. This is helpful, for example, if, let's say I'm teaching a literature course, and I start the course by asking students in the annotation layer to answer 20 different questions that I pose for them. And then they reply and they have a really great discussion. But then I teach the same course the next year. Instead of recreating every one of my prompt questions, I could simply make a new private group for the next semester's course and copy my initial annotations from the source group to the target group. And that tool helps me to do that. There's a bunch of other really nice tools for annotation stuff that I will just drop into the, John has built a bunch of other kind of tools that do cool things. I'm not going to go into great detail about what they are now because we're at time. And I'll also show you there's a really interesting visualization tool. This was built by Remy Kalir and Francisco Garcia at the University of Colorado, Denver, I believe. And this tool is a tool to help you visualize and see patterns in annotations, so you can see who's been annotating the most, what kind of annotations they've been making, and it can help you perform some analysis on annotations, sometimes for learning or sometimes just for research or for curiosity. That was a lot. We tried to get through it quickly, and thank you for bearing with us with technical problems. I realize many of you probably have time crunches and time pressures, so that's going to conclude the kind of demonstration portion of our webinar.